Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, and it's time for the Monday show. It is a solo episode today because unfortunately Mark has come down with illness. We wish him a speedy recovery. So it is just me, and I'm going to do my best to bring you some opinion and analysis on that 0-0 draw that Newcastle had with Bournemouth down on the south coast. As always, this episode is sponsored by NordVPN. Do click the link in the podcast description box for your discounted offer on your NordVPN subscription. One subscription can be used across 10 devices. It's perfect for when you're traveling on public transport, if you want to get linked up to the Wi-Fi there, and it keeps you safe and secure. And it really does help you scare away the hackers if they are lurking about after your personal deal. So hit the link in the podcast description box, support the podcast and keep secure at the same time. So yes, Newcastle United 0, Bournemouth 0 down at the Vitality, place where Newcastle United have not had much luck at all in recent years. Eddie Howe still yet to win there in the league, or still yet to be Bournemouth in the league. It's a bit of a bogey team for him against his former club. Newcastle United picking up their fourth clean sheet in the opening 5 Premier League games, third consecutive away game to end 0-0. For me, they are positives. Defensively, Newcastle United are proving very difficult to play against. Yes, Nick Pope had to make some saves on Sunday, but at the end of the day, that is what he's paid to do. I think there's a foundation there to build on, and this is the title of the episode. Don't panic. The foundation is there. And I think it is. It has been a bit of a slow start. Yes, Newcastle United have not picked up as many points as we'd like them to. And yes, teams are starting to get away. But it is much easier to build on, much easier to build the house of your dreams, for example, on the foundation that has been laid here by Eddie Howe and this group of players. 6 points and only 3 goals conceded. Yes, the lack of goals that they've scored themselves is a bit of a concern. However, I do think I'd rather be in this position, picking up points on the road, proving difficult to beat, keeping clean sheets, and now just waiting on the goals to bring Newcastle United some much-needed victories. I definitely do think there are positives to be had from not just the game against Bournemouth, but the games we've seen so far. I think they're in a decent position. I know not everybody will believe that, not everyone will agree with me when I say that, but I do think they're in a decent position. They're just waiting for one component of their play to click, and that's scoring goals. And once that happens, Newcastle United will be absolutely flying. And this is what an Eddie Howe team does. It's frustrating, of course it is, but they build over time. And when they get going, they are pretty much unstoppable. We saw it over quite a few games last season. So I think it's just about accepting this is what kind of an Eddie Howe side does. It's not the start we would have wanted, but it's also definitely not a time to panic whatsoever. Do let me know in the comments your thoughts on the season so far, and I'll read out the best of them. Hello to Les, hello to Peter, to Andrew, and to Gary. Thank you very much for tuning in. Look, there is absolutely no denying that the lack of goals and lack of creativity is an issue. Of course it is. Just 3 goals scored this season in the Premier League. Ranked 15th when it comes to expected goals, 4.57. 14th when it comes to shot with 35. It's not enough. Not denying that. It's not enough. But again, I go back to the title of this show. Don't panic, because there are other elements of Newcastle United's play which is quite impressive, namely their defensive displays, both actually across the back line and in the midfield as well. And there are reasons to why Newcastle United are struggling for goals. Eddie Howe has sort of admitted over the weekend that essentially they need to reinvent themselves. They need to reinvent Newcastle United's attack. That is not going to happen overnight. Of course, they've splashed big money on Nick Valdemade and Yuan Wissa. One man, unfortunately, is injured, and the other man, the big money signing, the record signing that for this club, he isn't the man that he's coming to replace. He isn't Alexander Isak, both in the way that they play, both in terms, and in terms of ability. He's not an out-and-out replacement for Alexander Isak, and that has to be considered when we're looking at the lack of goals and the lack of creativity. He needs time to settle. He also needs time to work with his teammates, and his teammates need time to work with him. And he's not the only new player who's going to be a big part of this starting 11 as well. So there's lots of elements at play here which we're waiting to kind of fall into place. It was never going to happen overnight, losing someone like Alexander Isak. And people were saying, why are you talking about Alexander Isak? Well, Eddie Howe brought it up in his press conference on Sunday a few times unprompted. He was the man who raised Alexander Isak's name after the Bournemouth game. So clearly it's on his mind, and it is right to address it. It is right to bring him up because you've lost arguably your most important player in Alexander Isak. Goals win you games. That's what it's all about. You can't replace him because no one can replace Alexander Isak. The man you brought in is a good player, but it's not going to happen overnight. And patience is going to be required. And that issue of it not happening overnight is accelerated by the fact that actually he's the only option. There isn't a Johan Wissa who knows this league to allow Voldemort to bed in. There isn't a Johan Wissa to allow for rotation to where, he may have played on Thursday night against Barcelona and then knew that the player who didn't play would have played against Bournemouth. So there's issues that are largely out of Newcastle United's control to why the lack of goals and creativity is there. But I'm not denying it is there and it needs to be fixed as soon as possible. But they are working hard behind the scenes, and I think we've seen enough from Voldemort to suggest that there is a decent player there. £70 million player. Well, we'll have to wait and see on that. But he's struggling, isn't he? And I feel sorry for the man. I do. But we've seen a few nice touches. I do question whether he's an out-and-out striker. I think he might be better playing off the shoulder of someone, Johan Wissa, if everything was in an ideal world, but it's not an ideal world. And I think there's questions to whether he can be the man to get Newcastle United through this difficult period in terms of the fixtures that are there. It's a busy calendar. You're playing during the week, then you're playing on the weekend. Can he get Newcastle United through to when Johan Wissa is available to be picked? But not only that, you've got to wait probably 2-3 weeks, maybe 4, until Wissa's up to match fitness, because there's a big difference between being fit and being available to be picked and being match fit. And that is a little bit of a concern. What we've seen so far is Voldemort, like I say, a few nice touches here and there. His hold play is really good. He can play with his back to goal, but he hasn't hit the ground running, and he hasn't, like I say, got Wissa to help him settle. It's a big responsibility on his shoulders and a big responsibility on the shoulders of Eddie Howe to get that right, to make sure he's got the balance of Voldemort's fitness, but also getting them to settle into a new city, into a new side, into a new club, into a new league. This is by no way how Eddie Howe would have wanted this to happen, but he hasn't got much option. The only other option that he has got is with Osula, and he was given 6 minutes against Bournemouth or thereabouts, and that again raises a few questions. Like I said last week, if not now, then when? When do you trust Will Osula? Now, he's likely to start against Bradford. That you can pretty much bet your last penny that he'll start against Bradford. But in terms of the Premier League and even European nights, you only have Will Osula and Nick Valdemalde as that striker option. Now, of course, Anthony Gordon will come back into the fold after serving his suspension. He started up top against Barcelona, but it doesn't work with Anthony Gordon up top. And you do have to ask that question about Will Osula. Like, when is Eddie Howe going to trust him? Because he is kind of running out of road in terms of having other options to start him. And maybe, I'm not saying you do this against Arsenal, but in the league games coming up, do you try and play Will Osula up top and have Nick Voldemort playing? Is that number 10? Is that an option? Do we get the best out of Voldemort that way? Yes, you lose someone in midfield, but maybe that's a sacrifice you're going to have to make, and just, throw caution to the wind a little bit and say to Will Osula, here's your opportunity. Here's your chance. If it brings the best out of Voldemort, maybe it's a gamble worth taking. But let me know in the comments your thoughts. It's certainly a big game for Osula on Wednesday, if indeed he does start against Bradford in the League Cup. Bradford going strong, and Osula has to take that chance if indeed it does come his way. Now, Newcastle United, going back to Bournemouth, had just 4 shots in the game, 1 on target, which was Jacob Murphy, and it was saved. They did have a penalty appeal, and Nick Voldemort's shirt was tugged. I do think that was a penalty. I think it would have been soft, but he's clearly got a good bit of his shirt. You can see that, whether it's in slow motion or in real time. Difficult for the referee to see that in real time, but that's what VAR is there for, isn't it? And again, we are sitting here on another Monday asking what the point in VAR is. It is clear to me He has tugged his shirt. Does he go down theatrically? Yes. Is it soft? Yes. But in the modern game, we've seen them given, and for the life of me, I can't work out why that wasn't given. It's a shirt pull. We were led to believe that we're going to start cracking down on this. You can clearly see his shirt was pulled, and it should have been a penalty, in my opinion. But the other thing to note about Sunday in Bournemouth was the lack of service. Like I said, 4 shots on target, and whether you're Mbappe, Alexander Isak, or Nick Voldemort, bottom line is, if you're not getting the crosses into the box, if you're not getting the right supply, you're not going to score goals. So I felt sorry for Voldemort at times because the service just wasn't coming to him, and that is the key. Now you can see Newcastle set up a little bit too defensively. Maybe they played 5 across the back with 3 centre backs, and people will say, well, that is a large reason to maybe why the creativity wasn't there. But on the flip side, this is not a poor Bournemouth side. This is a very good Bournemouth side who've only lost to Liverpool this season. Arguably should have got something from that game. If you take the game to Bournemouth, they're going to pick you off on the counter with the likes of Semenyo and Evan Nielsen. They've got very, very good players. They've got a good setup, a good manager. And yes, this is Newcastle United, and we want top 4 football, and the ambitions that we've got means that on one hand, you probably should be beating teams like Bournemouth, but at the same time, you've got to respect what's out in front of you. And Bournemouth's strength is hitting you on the transition, hitting you on the counter with speed. And actually, 5 at the back is probably the best way to stop that. But maybe it does, in turn, stop you from being creative up top. But any criticism of Voldemort, I think, is unwarranted. It's a horrible hand to be dealt with. He's got to settle in, but he's got to get the service as well. And you've also got the look of the green. Why he wasn't given a penalty, I have got no idea. Les in the comments says, soft or not, it was a penalty. We've got Gary saying, Wissa was brought for the here and now, with Voldemort being allowed time to develop and grow with the team. Unfortunately, we've had to throw the lad straight in, which was always going to be difficult. And Gary sums it up perfectly there. In an ideal world, what you would have the 2 strikers in Voldemort and Wissa rotating. You'd have that element of competition, but more importantly, there'd be no pressure on Voldemort to hit the ground running. Now, regardless of whether you think that's right or wrong, we know how Eddie Howe likes to work with new signings. He likes to bed them in. We saw that with Bruno. We've seen that with other players. This is not an ideal situation whatsoever. But the reality is that Newcastle need Voldemort to start scoring goals. But I go back to the point I just made. You also need to give him the service. But yeah, Gary, I think, is absolutely spot on there. Eric says, the worrying thing is Voldemort is no pace and can't press. This proves how it was justified not playing against Barcelona. Ian says, Willock will be sold next summer. In his opinion, he's not the same player as last season since injury. Maybe Miley as well to go out on loan. Lack of goals due to Wissa picking up an injury on international duty. Once Wissa and Ramsey is back, I'm sure we will score goals once again. And yeah, that is it. It is the injuries which are starting to impact Newcastle United. It's a nightmare scenario. But what can you do? Eddie Howe's just got to continue to press on through. And look, like I say, the position they're in, where defensively they are hard to beat, is a good position to be in. I'd rather be in that position than scoring goals and losing games, 3-2, 4-3, whatever. I'd rather be in the position where you are drawing 0-0 because you're only waiting for the goals to come, rather than scoring goals and then shipping goals by the boatload. So I think they're in a good position. It might not seem it now, but the points they've picked up so far could prove absolutely crucial going forward. They really, really could. It could come down, in May to this point that they picked up on the road at Bournemouth, who, they will be hoping for European football for the season after. So it's a good point. It really is a good point of the vitality. Anyone who says it's not, I think you need to reevaluate your opinion, in my opinion. And if we think back to 2 years ago, days after Newcastle United had lost to Borussia Dortmund in Germany, they went to Bournemouth. They were in the middle of an injury crisis. The players who did play looked tired. It was disjointed. You might remember that's when Lewis Miley came in to the fold. Newcastle just looked out at sea, really. Miley was the best player on the pitch that day. And they lost that game. On Sunday, although they lacked they lacked creativity, what they had was discipline, and they were organised, and they were determined, and they were hard to beat. And it was a contrast to what we saw a couple of years ago. And that's, the squad that they've got there. That's the players who have been there over the last 2 years continue to progress under Eddie Howe. And I think it's a marked comparison, and one that I think we should be positive about. He didn't lose. Okay, we didn't win, but we didn't lose against a very, very good Bournemouth side. And Bournemouth would have come into this game on Sunday hoping to take advantage of a tired Newcastle United or a changed Newcastle United side that, was disjointed and was unorganised, but they didn't get that. What they got was a very disciplined performance, especially at the back. And I think, like I say, foundations to build on. I mean, 7 changes is a lot of changes. No Bruno for the first time in 68 games, which was some record that he's had. And he mentioned pre-Barcelona that he wants to play in every game possible. He wanted to get to 100 was his aim. But sometimes it's for the better of the team and him himself as well, because he has looked knackered last few weeks. And in came Lewis Miley, in came Joe Willock alongside, of course, Sandro Tonali, the man with an unbelievable engine. And did either do smashingly? No, they didn't. But Newcastle United have to learn how to win without Bruno. They have to learn how to perform well without Bruno. And hopefully this rest for Bruno, because he'll not play against Bradford, you would think. He'll come in against Arsenal full of beans. There were some positives. I thought Botman and Malik Chow were excellent at the back, and that kind of just raises the question further about the long-term partnership at centre-back. We know Fabian Schär and Dan Burn have done tremendous, and quite rightly have started the season as the centre-back pairing, but Fabian Schär might even miss Arsenal. So Malik Chow likely to start there. Will Dan Burn come back in or as his partner, or will Eddie Howe stick with 5 at the back? Again, it remains to be seen there. I think one thing that is interesting is that long-term partnership. Now, clearly, Botman, ability-wise, is the best centre-back at the club. Few concerns over his injuries, but he looked really good. He was arguably the best player on the pitch for Newcastle on Sunday. And I think long-term, those two are the answer. But Dan Burn also had quite a decent game. He captained Newcastle as well on Sunday. And you can't just kind of rip up that back four, which has, once again, got another clean sheet. But going forward over the next few months, as rotation comes in and injuries no doubt start hitting Newcastle United as well, maybe some suspensions, there will be opportunities for Botman and for Malik Chow to really state their claim. And what they've got to do with opportunities like come on Sunday, they've got to make sure that they're actually giving Eddie Howe a really big headache. And I think already Eddie Howe will have that headache, a positive one, to what to do when Fabian Schär is fit. Let me know in the comments, because I think definitely if you were asking when everyone is fit and in form, you probably would say Botman and Malik Chow, which is a little bit harsh on Schär and Burn because they've been excellent. But if we're looking long term, I think they are definitely the answer. Let me go back into the comments and read what you guys are saying. Gary says, do you think it was the worst refereeing performance we've seen up to now? Not too sure about that. We've seen some pretty poor ones this season alone. Wasn't impressed with the chap against Wolves. I do think that was a penalty, and that alone is enough to definitely be complaining about. We've got hello to Roger, who's in the comments as well. Hello to John, who says, after the big games of Liverpool and Barca, there has to be a drop-off, which is perfectly normal. The good thing is that Leeds and Bournemouth still couldn't get the win. And that's kind of, I think, one way to look at it, is that you're not losing games, you're picking up points, which could prove crucial in the race for top 4 football at the end of the season. We also had Lewis Hall back, which was really, really important for Newcastle United. He won 11 out of 18 duels, which was the most in black and white. And with him getting back to match fitness, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens going forward with Kieran Trippier. Will Tino Livramento go back to his normal position on the right full time and Lewis Hall come back in? You would say yes, but Kieran Trippier has also performed really well, really since coming in last February at right back, with Tino going on to the other side. And these are positive dilemmas for Eddie Howe to have, big decisions to be made. But really thought Lewis Hall was excellent on Sunday, and he's going to just continue to get better and better. Might he start on Wednesday against Bradford to get more minutes in under his belt? Potentially. That's the way you get back to full fitness, is by playing competitive football. So it's going to be interesting to see that team sheet on Wednesday. But great to see him back. Just on Botman and Chow as well. They collectively won 5 out of 7 aerial duels. Good on the ball. good passing, good passing range, short and long. I do think there's an exciting prospect of a partnership there. It's just when Eddie Howe makes that call. And I also think Waldemar showed little glimpses of what he can do. And like I say, it's that back to the goal, which is going to be crucial for him to show his very best football. Those little touches that he can do, the Murphy chance being the prime example, when it's played into him and it's just one touch, and it allows Murphy into the box to force a good save from the keeper. And we saw that against Barcelona. We saw that against Wolves. He's really good with his feet. And I think because he's so tall, people just assume you've got to get the service into the box and get him to head towards goal. But it's not the way to maybe get him at his best. What he wants is the ball to his feet, not to be made of the fact that he was gesturing to his feet on Sunday. That's where he wants it, because he can hold it up, he can turn, he can twist, he's got skill about him. So it's about getting that balance right. It's about playing to his strengths, but also Waldemar and making sure he's in the box and ready to pounce if and when the crosses do indeed come in. But yeah, I know, like I said, it's not the start that we would have wanted, but don't panic. There are definitely foundations to build on here. I think Newcastle are in a good position. We can remain confident that Eddie Howe is going to start to get those wins. We will catch the teams above them. I think once we start picking up consecutive wins, the momentum will start to build. Once we see players coming back, yes, it's going to have to be after the next international break, and Ramsey and Wissam, we pray no more injuries occur. But we can be positive. I really do think we can be positive. And I know that won't go down well with everyone, but I think there is a lot to like about what we've seen so far. We've got John saying, is it me or does Barnes not doing it at the moment? Is he carrying an injury? Well, he's just had a little kid. Congratulations to him. And that is obviously a very tiring thing to be on top of. Look, I think it's difficult for Barnes. We know kind of where his strengths lie, and it is cutting inside. But I don't think he's been as bad as everyone's making out to be. I think, again, we've seen it in short bursts. That speed he's got, he can be direct. I just think because he's not scoring goals or maybe assisting, I think people are getting on his back. But bearing in mind, he probably should have won 2, maybe 3 penalties so far this season, and they weren't given. The one against Liverpool and the one against Wolves, which wasn't a penalty, it was just outside the box, but should have been sent off the defender. He's getting in those positions, he's creating chances, he's getting shots on goal, they're just not coming off. I don't think he's been as bad as people are making out, and he's going to be crucial going forward, because that element of competition on that left wing is really, really important. Now, Anthony Gordon will come back in, you would imagine, against Bradford, and he'd probably start against Arsenal, because he is, ability-wise, the best left winger they've got. But what you need is a quality left winger alongside you, pushing you for that place. What I want to see when it comes to the team sheet against Arsenal going forward is that just because Anthony Gordon is available to be picked, we don't automatically know who's going to get picked at left wing, because that's not the way it should be. You want Eddie Howe sitting there looking at his team sheet and going, yeah, I've got Anthony back, but hasn't Harvey been brilliant? And I get the point. So far, he hasn't been brilliant, but I don't think he's been all that bad. Getting in the right positions, he's looking threatening, he's showing his pace at times. Yes, it needs to be more consistent. Yes, he needs to be taking those chances when they come his way, but also he's had the bad luck of VAR and referees not doing their job properly. I don't think he's been that bad at all. We just need to see a little bit more from him, a little bit more clinical in front of goal. But there's definitely a top quality player there who is so important for Newcastle United. Leslie says, I think Barnes is an impact player for the last 20 minutes. But you remember towards last season, end of last season, he came in, didn't he, when Gordon got suspended against Brighton in the FA Cup, came in against West Ham, played a role in the goal there that Bruno scored with his head, played a massive role in the cup final, and he was Newcastle's most threatening player going into the kind of the last month or so of the season. So he's shown he can do it. His return isn't that bad in the black and white shirt. I just think, Gordon is Gordon's nicer on the eye because he's maybe a little bit quicker, he's a little bit more flashy, and Barnes, for many, he's limited to what he can do, which I think is a little bit unfair on him. And I think people are maybe just looking for a little bit of a scapegoat, and it shouldn't be anyone, and it certainly shouldn't be Barnes for me. I think he's shown enough to win the backing of everybody, in my opinion. Just going to dive into some more of the comments. Leslie says, Howgard's tactically spot on. Bournemouth are a good team. The goals will come and we'll start moving up the table. And I think that just reaffirms kind of my message. I think Newcastle United are just waiting for the goals to come. They will come. And yes, we'd love them to come now, and we don't want to get left behind when it comes to the Premier League table. But they're not in a bad position, in terms of the way they're playing. They're not. Defensively, if you can shut up shop, that's half the battle, isn't it? That is half the battle. And now we're just waiting on them to score goals. Okay, 6 points from your opening 5 games. You're already 9 points off the top. Bournemouth sitting 4th on 10 points. But look, Newcastle United only 4 points off, Bournemouth in that position. So, they're not too far behind. And once the goals start coming, once the confidence starts building and the momentum starts building as well, I think we will see Newcastle United shoot up the table and start to do what they did, in that period towards the end of last year when they went on that fantastic run. And that's what we're aiming for. I think it's just about getting the new players in. It's about dealing with the injuries and also dealing with the rotation. You've got to remember, this is the first time this season when we've seen the team sheet after a midweek game, and we were all wondering what would Eddie Howe do, and it was hard to kind of predict what the team sheet would look like. In the end, 7 changes, and of course, in an ideal world, you wouldn't really want to make those changes. You wish that the players had the engine on them to play every game, but they just do not. And if you weren't happy with the team sheet against Bournemouth, then it's only going to get worse for you, because these tough decisions are going to have to be made throughout the campaign heading into the new year, because there's so many games in the League Cup, in the Champions League, and obviously top flight, and then you throw in the FA Cup come January. The team isn't going to be consistent. It isn't always going to be full of necessarily Newcastle's most individually gifted players, but they have a squad in which they should be able to handle that when everybody is fit. And it goes back to the original point. If everybody was fit, it would be a lot easier for Newcastle United to pick up wins and to maybe even surprise Bournemouth down at the South Coast. Jacob Ramsey coming in, for instance, Johan Wissa maybe playing against Barcelona, and Nick Voldemorte on the bench, and then coming to this one without having to have played, 10, 15 minutes against Barcelona. And I look at the team against Bournemouth, and you had, like I said, Joe Willock in there, Miley coming in, Jacob Murphy, who didn't start against Barcelona, coming in as well, and off the bench, Barnes and Alanga just off the hour mark. Lascelles, his first appearance in a wee while, and Will Osula. No Bruno coming off the bench, no Joe Linton, and Eddie Howe mentioned the fact that he's still balancing that injury to Joe Linton, still feeling the effects of that. So that's another headache that Eddie Howe's dealing with. Bruno, like I said, look, knackered, so that was the right decision to leave him on the bench. But imagine if you had Wissa on the bench and Ramsey as well to bring off, or indeed start. Those 2 injuries are really impacting Newcastle United's ability to balance the responsibilities they've got in terms of all the games they've got to play. So we want them back as quick as possible. It's going to be a few weeks, and in the meantime, the players Eddie Howe has got, which is good option still, we'll have to hopefully seize the initiative and seize the opportunity and start picking up a few wins. Just a word on Lewis Miley, because he played his 50th game for Newcastle against Bournemouth, and some of the comments that have come his way since that game have been nothing short of embarrassing, really. This is a lad who is one of our own, a young lad with the best years ahead of him. He burst on to the scene, then hasn't got as much game time as he maybe would have liked, as we maybe would have expected. But when you've got Joe Linton, Bruno and Tonali in front of you, it's hard to get in front of them. And then the day, he's still a young player developing, but he's had to turn off replies to a tweet that he put out where he said he's very proud to have made 50 appearances for my boyhood club. And what world are we living in where a young man celebrating a fantastic achievement has to do that on social media. Like, come on. And I seem to be saying this every week. And I know it's not everyone, it's a small minority. But the clue's in the name. It's Newcastle United. Whether it's Alanga getting a bit of grief, Barnes getting a grief, or Lewis Miley, come on. They're all playing for this club. They all want to do their best for the shirt, for the badge, and for the fans. It's ridiculous. Thankfully, it's not everybody. It's not the majority, but just the minority is bad enough. We should be supporting everybody, especially a local lad. Absolutely disgraceful that he had to turn off his comments on social media when he was just trying to mark a very big achievement for him. And look, did he do well? Did he write the headlines? No, he didn't. But it's hard for a player to come in, especially one that's still learning and developing. It's hard for him to come in out of the cold and hit that ground running and put in a good performance. I think that's one of the things that hopefully he'll get in the next few months, is that he will get consistent minutes. He hasn't got that in a long, long time. Ideally for him, he'd want to be starting every game. It's not going to happen. But if that's not going to happen, then you need consistent minutes, not 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. You need half an hour, 45 minutes to, so you can actually really make an impact on a game. And hopefully you'll get that with all the clashes coming up. But so difficult to be dropped in to a midfield, especially one where its first choice is arguably the best midfield in the Premier League, by the way. So hard for you to be dropped in when you're still learning your game, when you're still going through a process where you've added muscle to your body and you've got to be stronger, and you're dealing with that. Like, he's never gonna put in a top performance out of the cold. It's about building that up, and I know what you want is an instant impact. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. We have to consider that with Miley. Like I say, hopefully you'll get more opportunities going forward and we'll start to impress. Gary says, I'm seeing more of this. Certain people attacking our own. It'll be very small minority, and even fans of other clubs, with social media is becoming a cesspit with no repercussions. Totally agree. X is a platform which unfortunately seems to allow this, and it's horrible to see. Les says, unfortunately, the loud minority get a lot of the attention. Roger says, Eddie Howe did great to use the squad. It was irritating at times, but that's what he had to do. Gary says, Bournemouth was always going to be a hangover to Barcelona on Thursday night. Really difficult mentally and physically. We created against Barca, but missed out by inches. It could have been 2-0 at half time. Les says, my only worry is that with games coming thick and fast, Eddie doesn't have enough time with the players, but I do think we'll overcome it. I think Eddie's a fantastic coach, isn't he? And just 10 minutes with Eddie will no doubt improve you as a player. But Les is right there. The schedule is filling up and games are coming thick and fast. And it's new for Eddie Howe as well. You've got to consider that, because 2 years ago he didn't have the squad. Even last season, you can argue he didn't have that depth. Newcastle United have got that depth. And Eddie Howe hasn't got the excuse of it being the first time back in the Champions League after 21 years, first time he's managed in Europe. He hasn't got that excuse of kind of getting used to things. And he hasn't got the excuse of not having the depth. Okay, you haven't got Wissa, you haven't got Ramsey, but you've still got depth. So he's getting used to that. He's getting to grips with that. And I think what we saw on Sunday was the first time he's had to get used to it. The first time he's had the chance to change his squad. And it would be a lot easier if Wissa and Ramsey were there to be picked, but they're not. And actually, if we go back to the premise of the show, 0-0 against an informed Bournemouth down on the South Coast, where you've had a horrible run of form as it is not a bad result. It's a good result. Bournemouth are a good side. They avoid injuries. They will be in the conversation for Europa League football without a shadow of a doubt. They arguably should have qualified for this year's competition. They're a good side. One of the informed sides at the moment. 0-0, I think, is a good point. I'd gone for a defeat, so I can't grumble at the fact that we got a point. I think just after putting everything into that Barcelona game where the players were really out on their feet come full time, as Gary said there, mentally and physically, it was always going to be difficult. But to come away with a point, I think we should be celebrating that. We didn't lose. And again, foundation to build on. Robert here says, I think we need to get rid of Miley. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on that. Davey says, I think Miley should have been sent out on loan. Interesting. Ipswich were linked to him, and I can totally see the argument for sending Lewis Miley out on loan because his personal development would, rocket. He needs first team football. He needs to be starting as many games as possible. But from a club point of view, you know how good Miley is. He's a talented player, and you're trying to build a squad. So if you send Miley out on loan, what do you do? For instance, had he gone out on loan, who starts against Bournemouth in the middle on Sunday? Because you look at the bench, a tired Bruno, a Joe Linton still suffering from the aftermath of an injury. They're your two options because Ramsey's injured. So, you need Miley in this squad because he can add something to this team, most certainly. And that's when Newcastle United put a stop to any prospect of him going out on loan because they need him in this squad. Eddie Howe knows how good of a player he is, and he has a first team future at Newcastle United, especially when the keyword is rotation. If you send them out on loan, you more than likely then have to go out and spend money on another centre midfielder. Some people already think you need one, even with Miley here. Extra money spent, not an easy task to complete. Yeah, there's reasons why Miley stays. As much as for his personal development, it would have been good for him to go out on loan. Roger says, look at how Anderson has flourished at Forest with regular game time. And I'm not denying that at all. And actually, Elliot Anderson probably, especially last season, wouldn't have been in Newcastle United's first team. It's difficult, isn't it? Because what do? You've got three world-class midfielders. Tonali, certainly, in Bruno, Joe Linton, and Sandro Tonali. Which one do you take out to accommodate Lewis Miley? And then it's going to take time for him to get up to the levels of Elliot Anderson, up to the levels of what those three are producing on quite a regular basis. It's a horrible dilemma, Eddie Howe, to be in, because I'm sure if he could, he'd play the majority of players every single week, but he can't. You can only pick 11. So it's difficult to get that decision right. It is in many ways sad to see, but you've got to think for the best of the football club. And at the moment, the best three midfielders are Bruno, Tonali, and Joe Linton. And Roger says there, it's a squad game. Most certainly is. Gary says Championship clubs were in for Miley in the summer to take on loan. Eddie wanted him here for the coming season, and rightly so, in my opinion, 100% Gary on that. And just looking at the other results this weekend, let me just go and click onto them. Aston Villa drawing at Sunderland, Arsenal, Man City. We've got Leeds beating Wolverhampton Wanderers 3-1. Wolves look doomed. We've got West Ham losing to Crystal Palace. Will Potter still be in a job? Tottenham and Brighton drawing 2-2. Everton losing 2-1 at Anfield with some questionable decisions. Manchester United picking up a 2-1 victory over Chelsea, and Fulham beating Brentford 3-1. I mean, you do fear for Brentford. At the moment, Newcastle United down in 13th, actually on 6 points. The bottom three, Wolves, West Ham and Aston Villa. And Wolves yet to pick up a single point, having lost their opening 5 Premier League games. Look, no getting away from it. Newcastle United need to start picking up wins, but let's not panic. There are foundations to build on. A strong defence is the important building block, and now we just need the goals to start flowing. Waldemar, as he gets more settled, as he gets fitter, I think we'll start to add to his tally of 1. When Visser and Ramsey get back in, I think we'll see a totally different dynamic in the Newcastle United starting 11 and squad. Of course, we can't wait until then because time waits for no man, especially in the Premier League. And hopefully we can pick up 3 points against Arsenal on Sunday after getting progress through the next round of the League Cup. But don't panic. Things are all right. 5 games gone. Plenty of football to be played. There's positives, most certainly. Cooper says, do you think Waldemar will come good? I do. I definitely do. I think Waldemar will come good as an out-and-out striker. I don't think that's his position. I think he needs to play as a second striker off the shoulder of Wissa, and that's where he'll be his best at. Will we see the best of him over the next month, 6 weeks? On one hand, we have to. On the other hand, I'm not too sure we will. But we have to back him. We have to support him. We have to show him that love that the Newcastle United fan base is famous for, because I think he will come good in the right position with the right players around him. This is just not the ideal opportunity, essentially, to carry that weight on your shoulders when you're trying to get settled into a new city and a new environment. Looks like he's doing all right in terms of that settling, but really you would want him to bed him in. You'd want that rotation with Wissa, but it's not the case. So he needs to step up, unfortunately, because Newcastle United need the goals. But I think he will prove to be a very good player, just maybe not as an out striker. Paddy says, can understand that fans want goals. However, 3 points from 3 away games on a clean sheet is no mean feat, 100%. And Gary says, since the game yesterday, I've seen Hall, Miley and Voldemort and Willick all attacked on social media. For God's sake, we can all have opinion on a poor performance, but let's not get personal. 100% agree with Gary. Darren says, yesterday the game was a bore. We didn't try to win. That was set up for a draw. And I talked about this earlier in the show. We know where Bournemouth's strengths are. You know, if you take the game to Bournemouth and you don't pull it off, they're going to hit you and they're likely going to score. Now, you could ask the question whether the fact that it was set up for a draw, and Eddie would deny this. You know, obviously he goes out to win every game, but obviously it's a very defensive setup, isn't it? Now, that maybe isn't the most positive message to send out pre-game, but again, it goes back to balancing what's in front of you. And because Newcastle are playing in so many competitions, maybe it is a case that Eddie and the staff can no longer just think about the game that they are about to play. They have to think about the games coming up and the bigger picture. Now, I don't for one moment think Eddie's set up for a draw. I think he's set up not to lose, but he would have wanted to win that game. Of course he would have done. And, you know, they had the chance of Jacob Murphy. They had the penalty appeal. It wasn't as if, you know, I mean, they weren't great going forward, but they had 1 or 2 chances. I certainly don't think they went down there with the sole intention of just getting a point. But as someone's just said, a point at Bournemouth is not a bad point. It's a good point against one of the informed sides in the Premier League. And I go back to the original point I've been making. The biggest point I've been trying to make through this episode is that you don't need to panic. There are positives to take from the opening few games of this season, even though the points tally doesn't add up to what we think Newcastle United deserve, and of course what we want to see. However, feels like quite a few do think Eddie Howe did set up not to win that game and to draw that game. Darren says the positive that Pope kept his 3rd clean sheet is the only positive. Roger says 5-4-1 is a safety net setup. Darren says yesterday's game needed someone like Wissa up front and we need Gordon back, which again leads to the fact that the hand that Newcastle are currently dealt is not of their own making. Gordon stupidly getting sent off and Wissa coming back with a knee injury. You know, that's totally out of the club's control, unfortunately. Paddy says, attacking players who come in for a squad, players have been targeted indirectly because of the frustrations about Eddie's team selection, and that is one that I trust. Thankfully, as Gary mentions, the suspension is now over for Anthony Gordon, and I think we will see him against Bradford on Wednesday before playing, I think, starting against Arsenal on Sunday. I hope you've enjoyed the show. This has been the Everything is Black and White podcast, the Monday show. Do get into the comments. Let me know your thoughts about anything that we've discussed. What were your thoughts on the team selection against Bournemouth? What are your thoughts on a point? Are you like me, happy with it, to be honest? Of course, I'd want to win and pick up all 3 points. But picking up a point at the Vitality, I would have taken that if you'd offered it to me before kickoff, and we got it after the full-time whistle, so I can't grumble too much about that. Final time to repeat what I've been saying all afternoon. Don't panic. There are positives there. There's a foundation to build on. Newcastle United are in a good position, even though the table suggests otherwise. They are proven difficult to beat, defensively strong. They just need the goals to come, and I believe they will. It might get worse before it gets better, because I'm not sure Voldemort is an out-and-out striker, but certainly I think there's reason for optimism. There's reason for positivity. let's look ahead to Bradford. Let's look ahead to Arsenal, where hopefully they can pick up another win there. Thank you very much for tuning in. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. Do hit like, do hit subscribe, do get into the comments, and I'll see you guys very soon.